So, white guilt and presidential elections. Predilections. I'm going to have to look that word up before I make my next video. Predilections. For whatever reason, when I make videos and I say the word presidential election, my brain automatically, it's like there's this echo in my brain that says predilections. So, white guilt in presidential elections. So I'm making this video. What instigated this video was watching someone react to Matt Walsh's latest documentary. I don't know if it's his latest. I have not heard about it until just recently. It's called Am I Racist? He made a documentary before, not too long ago, called What is a Woman? This was when there was a lot of hubbub about what the definition of a woman is, and probably now I imagine it's not a coincidence that this documentary comes out now in 2024 as the presidential election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is going on, because racism is one of the big issues again, right? This happened in the last election where racism became like the major issue. Last election, people were actually pointing that out. I'm surprised that I haven't seen anybody point it out this election, but last election, people showed charts about when it is that racism becomes a major issue, right? They should, like, this is my hand going along the graph, right? So it turns out that when there's a presidential election going on, all of a sudden racism gets into the news and in the media. It's like a 4-year cycle. Like, racism becomes unimportant through most of the 4 years, and then at the time of election, all of a sudden that's important again. Though I don't know that always happened. I don't remember racism being an issue in elections until Donald Trump ran for president, and I see that at I don't want to forget about the documentary, but I see that as a lot of the focus on racism has to do with trying to make sure Trump doesn't get elected, right? So that's how I see it. That if the Republicans had somebody who was more of a conformist, someone who was more of a bot, right, then racism wouldn't be such a big deal as it is now. I don't believe. I believe it has a lot to do with Trump, but I don't believe it's because Trump is a racist. I believe it's because the people who don't want him in office are using that as a way to try to make sure he doesn't get into office. Uh, but that's partly because, like, when George W. Bush was president, he was a bot, right? He did what the you might say the deep state. He was one of their bots. That, to me, there's no other explanation for why he went into Iraq than that, right? I cannot. There's no part of my brain where it makes sense to me that George W. Bush thought going into Iraq was a good way to fight the terrorists who were responsible for 9/11. But anyways, that's a little bit of a tangent, right? So the point there is, though, that as long as you're willing to go along with the flow and listen to the people who are kind of in charge of the real government, not the elected government, but the real government, you'll be fine. But if you're like Trump and you're the bull in the china shop and you're going against the grain and you're saying fuck the deep state and I'm going to do what I want, then they're going to attack you at every angle they possibly can, right? That's my conspiracy theory for this video, right? I think that should be the end of my conspiracy theory for this video. But yeah, so I watched Matt Walsh's video, or I didn't watch his video. I watched this guy react to Matt Walsh's documentary, and in one of the things he does in the video, in the documentary, or he did for his documentary, was to create a fake seminar to help white people rid themselves of their guilt, their racism. I'm sorry, not their guilt, their racism. And people showed up for it. And there's a scene in that documentary where he's kind of walking people through these kind of yoga exercises to kind of, what's that word from you typically associate with Christianity, with exorcising demons, right? This is kind of how it appears, almost like they're trying to exorcise their racism as though it were an evil spirit within them. And I just got a message that my battery's going to die soon, so I have to try to make this short. But I don't want to go off on tangents and rants and these sorts of things. But if I don't successfully record this one, of course I could just go get a charger. So, but as I'm watching these white people trying to rid themselves of their racism, I thought that's just pure guilt, right? And so what I see is going on in the country is there's a lot of white people who have this same guilt, and it's being manipulated by the media. Right? The media knows, apparently, maybe they saw how successful it was, or whatever, or they're just that good, and they said we're gonna take this guilt, we're gonna use it we're gonna pry it open, use it. We're going to leverage it and use it to manipulate these elections. And so this is why the media harps on Donald Trump being a racist. It's not because Donald Trump is a racist. It's not because they think he's a racist. It's because they know that there are millions of white Americans out there who have this guilt. And they know that they're looking for someone to project their own racism onto, right? That this is something that you see with homophobic people, homophobes, that if a man suppresses his own homosexuality, one of the ways you can spot that is because he constantly sees homosexuals everywhere, right? If he sees two men hugging, he's like, oh, look at these fags. That is a sign of someone suppressing their own homosexuality, right? I forget the term for that. I believe projection is one term for it, but I believe there's a more specific term for when you're projecting like I think it might just be projection. But if you're suppressing something about yourself that you don't like, right? There is what is called repression and suppression. You can look those up. I'm not entirely sure the difference. One of them is conscious, one of them is unconscious. You don't even know you're doing it. Because whatever it is that you don't like about yourself, your brain is aware that you don't like it and is kind of like doing you a favor and saying, I'm just going to keep that down there where I can't even see it. And so one of the big places this shows up is around sexuality, right? And this is something that has been shown in studies. Right, like with, I believe there were 2 studies done on men who claimed to be straight. They identified as straight men, and they were grouped into who has a problem with homosexuals and who does not have a problem with homosexuals. Then what they did was they hooked them up to these machines that could measure their states of sexual arousal, right? Like they had a band that they wrapped around their penis that could measure if their penis at all increased in size, if they started to get erect and this sort of thing. I forget the other things that they used, but you can look this up too, right? It was a college, I believe, or a university that did these. There was more than one, I believe, that two universities did the same study. I believe they did it on their students. Were their test subjects, and I could be wrong about that, but then what they did was individually they had these men watch gay porn, right? And what did they find? They found that the men who had a problem with homosexuals were the ones most often turned on by the gay porn. So this is what I'm talking about. That these were the men who, if they saw like two guys like holding hands in public, they flipped out, right? Or if they, these are the men who, like when Trump was in the car with Aiden Ross and they saw them two together listen to the radio, they're like, oh, they're gonna make out. Uh, it's these are the guys who actually got turned on by the game porn, not the people who were okay with homosexuality, right? Well, and what does that mean? It means that they are suppressing their own homosexual urges. They have homosexual urges they're not even aware of, and instead of facing that, they are projecting it onto other people. They're saying, "Ah, you're the problem. You're the fag, not me. I'm not the fag. You're the fag, right?" But you see the same thing when it comes to racism, right? That these people out here who have this guilt complex that surrounds their own racism. They're like, I'm not the racist. It's not me. Donald Trump, he's obviously the racist. I know he is because the media says he is over and over again. He must be. Uh, so, yeah. Someone trying to rid themselves of their own racism is like someone trying to cure themselves of their homosexuality, right? But it's not. Of course, I'm saying that with the belief that it isn't just white people who are racist, and that people in general are racist, right? And when I say that they're racist, I just mean that people have this natural tendency to generalize and to make assumptions about people because of these generalizations that people make. Uh, that people will say, well, racism is taught to kids. It's not, this is something that, and it's only white people, they say, right? White people taught their kids racism when they were younger, and that's how they got to be racist when they got older. Because there's no other explanation for it, right? Which to me makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I wasn't taught that, right? No one ever came to me and said black people are pieces of shit and all this other sorts of things. I did hear comments along those lines as far as like if a room was messy, right? Someone might come in and say, you're living like an N word, right? I am scared to say that, aren't I? So stuff like that I did hear. Uh, but I would say that was about it, right? So when I think about my own racist thoughts, though, it has nothing to do with that, right? What do I think of as like a racist thought that I would have? A racist thought that I would have would be, now I am aware that there are people who like are outspokenly against blacks. The people who don't like blacks at all. They don't want blacks in the country or whatever. That is its own kind of racism. Maybe that's what people mean when they say racist, right? For me, what I mean when I say racist is just to make a generalization about somebody based on their race. It's like with the room being messy thing, right? That's just a generalization, right? But one thought that I might have is if I were an employer, if I owned my own business, or if I were an employer of somebody else's business, like I would say sorry, not an employer, but if I were like say the hiring manager of someone else's business, and a black person comes to me looking for a job, my first inclination is going to be, you're going to have to prove yourself, right? Because my brain is already thinking no. Nope. But this isn't something that somebody taught to me. This isn't something that I learned from watching television. This is something that I gathered just from my own experience as a worker. That I've had probably, I'm 48 years old. I've been working since I was 16. I've had at least 20 different jobs. I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of people. And if I were like to rank like the worst coworkers that I've ever had in terms of like their job performance, their attitude at work, like black people would make up the majority of the bottom of that list, right? And it's for that if I were an employer, I'd be like, yeah, no, I don't think I want it. I don't think I want you here, just based on this first impression, right? Now, that being said, I have worked with black people who were good workers. Where I work now, there's a black guy who works there who was a really good worker, right? But this tendency, this inclination, this predilection, the right word? I don't know. I'm gonna have to look that word up because I've totally forgotten what that means. But that's just based on my own experience, right? It's just based on, it's like if I going up the highway and I need to use the bathroom somewhere and I'm in some state that I've never been in, where am I going to stop at? I'm going to stop at a gas station, right? If I see a gas station on the side of the highway or a fast food place, I'm going to stop there, right? Do I know that they have a bathroom? I don't know that. But it's a good prediction, right? Based on all my past experience, based on all the years of experience that I have driving up the interstate or driving through the state. If I need to use the bathroom, a gas station is probably a good place to stop. I don't actually have proof that they have a bathroom. I don't know for certain they have a bathroom, but I'm willing to bet money if it's a gas station that has a bathroom, right? Now, that makes sense to do that, right? Because you don't want to live life having to treat every decision you make as if you were just fresh out of the womb, right? You don't want to have to. If I'm thinking about where to get a job or who to marry or where to invest my money, I don't want to have to look at each situation as if I've never seen this before in my life. The battery's running low. So this is why people make generalizations, right? Your brain, you might say, is geared towards making generalizations, and one of the places where I see this is most obvious is in language, right? That if you write a sentence improperly and people read it, all of a sudden their brain was like, "Oh, that's fucked up," That's not right, and that's just because the brain makes generalization. The brain is kind of geared towards this. I've read sentences like this 1,000 times, but then I got to this one point where it was totally way off. And you might say the brain doesn't like that, right? It wants for things to be predictable, right? Predictability is good. But predictability is based on generalizations. So what I'm getting at is that just because you had a racist thought or a racist feeling doesn't mean you're a bad person, right? If you have the ability to recognize that some thought you had was racist, that, like I said, if I'm an employer and a black person comes to me for a job, I could go with the first inclination and say, "Oh, no, I've worked with plenty of black people, I'm not going to hire you." I could go with that, would be the first inclination. But if I have the ability to recognize that and say, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? The doubt is mine. It's my doubt, right? Because I've worked for 30 years, and but just bashing yourself, right, or saying that I'm a bad person because I had this thought, or whatever, or I need to get rid of my racism. I think that's not the healthy way to look at it. And it's certainly not the healthy way to look at it, to point your finger at Donald Trump and say, oh, he's the racist. It's not me. Right. uh, that's what I see a lot of. When I see people talk about Donald Trump as the next Adolf Hitler, he is, or a reincarnation of Adolf Hitler, or things like that, I see this, what it looks like is projection. It looks like people who just don't want to acknowledge their own racist thoughts, beliefs, or feelings, and they just want to project them onto somebody else. They just want to say, you're the problem, you're our scapegoat. But I do believe that, to some degree, these people are also being played by the media. This isn't like there's just this mass kind of hysteria, and that the suppressed racists all got together and decided they're going to be against Donald Trump. I think the media has kind of ignited that fire, right? So, and then they did it. They doubled down on it in the last election by making racism such a huge problem, right? And making it sound like white people are inherently racist, that America is inherently racist, and all these other sorts of things, so that white people are like, oh no, I'm not, I can't be racist, it's not me, right? It's not me. So that sort of thing makes people kind of go, oh, it's got to be somebody else, right? It's got to be it's people like Trump and his supporters. They're the bad guys, right? It's not me. So, and this is what makes white people willing to destroy American history and things like that, is because of their own guilt. I got a bee in here. It's not a bee, it's a yellow jacket. Yeah. So I would probably suggest, if you're curious about that, looking up psychological defense mechanisms like projection, right? Things like that. You can look up the studies on homophobia, or suppressed homosexuality amongst homophobic people. Right. I see this also with trans. I'm at this. This could be another kind of prejudice, but I'm at the point now where if I see a cisgendered straight person who is obsessed with this subject of transgender, my first thought is, you're trans and in denial. You are suppressing your own transgender behavior. There's really no other explanation for why you're so obsessed with this topic, right? And people might say, "Oh no, it's because of the kids," and I have a hard time buying that, especially if you're not focused on the kids when you're talking about the subject, right? If you're talking about chromosomes and men can't be women and things like that, then it's not really about the kids, right? It's more about you trying to delegitimize the whole subject, right? But I do think that there is some. Actually, I don't know that there needs to be a line drawn from what is, like, say, the average person's racism, right? Because like, if I haven't said it already, I did make this video once before, and it got cut short. But so that one's gone. But the way I see it is, the average person will at least have racist thoughts, right? Racist feelings, racist beliefs. Uh, you know, in the same way that even women can have misogynist thoughts, and even gays can have homophobic thoughts, and trans can have transphobic thoughts. A lot of trans are transphobic, a lot of gays are homophobic. Uh, you know, I. Uh, but what I was going for there was, I think there might be I don't want to call it a kind of racism, but there might be people out there who are, you might say, dangerously racist, right? Uh, People who want to kill other people just because of their race and things like that. That may exist. It might exist. I don't know that it exists. Uh, so things like that, maybe those are things that should be dealt with in a kind of restrictive way. You want to restrict those sorts of things. But just what you might call the average person's racism, if I'm gonna choosing people for a basketball team, I'm gonna choose the black person first. That's kind of the average person's racism, right? Uh, I think to look at that, right? I don't think there's any reason to bash yourself for that, or to say that there's something inherently evil with that, right? Because that's just a generalization, right? Generalizing things is not inherently evil, right? If there's anything that needs to be done about generalizations, it is to just recognize that it is a generalization. And that assuming that a gas station has a bathroom just because it's a gas station could lead me to making a wrong decision, right? It could, right? Uh, but I think a lot of people are obsessed with racism. I think a lot of people are looking for racism where it doesn't exist, right? Like when COVID happened, when COVID came in and black people were dying at higher rates than white people. And this was taken as evidence that the United States is racist. And I hear this and I'm like, how did you come to the conclusion that black people dying at higher rates than white people has anything to do with racism? Like, what is the assumption that's being made there that would lead people to think that? Are you saying that black people go to hospitals and they're just ignored? I don't understand how that people come to that conclusion. Uh, because someone like me sees that and I think, well, that makes sense. That black people would die at higher rates than white people because black people have higher rates of heart disease. Black people have higher rates of diabetes, and if you have diabetes or heart disease, you're more likely to die of COVID. And then people might say, well, the higher rates of heart disease and higher rates of diabetes are proof that America's racist. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not. You don't get diabetes from people being racist, right? You don't get heart disease from people being racist. So I think there is a bit of over obsession with racism in general in the country, but that is for a large part because some people do use racism as a weapon. It's not just being used as a weapon against Donald Trump, but it is being used as a weapon in other areas too, right? To make social change, to pressure people one way or another, right? Uh, but it can be used as a weapon because people have this guilt. People have this, oh, I'm a bad person if I have a racist thought. If you know, if I think that, yeah, I don't really want to hire a black person because, yeah, in my experience, they're not good workers. You know, I'm a bad person for thinking that. Maybe I should go to jail just for thinking that. I don't know. That's the sort of thing that makes it possible for people to use racism as a weapon, right? It is the fact that people have this guilt instead of just looking at these thoughts and saying, you know what, that was just a natural thing. You know, generalizing is a natural process of the brain. It's not something that needs to be shunned. I don't need to exercise this demon of generalizing the universe around me. If anything, I should just be careful, you know, and recognize when I'm making a generalization and when making a generalization could lead to a bad result. I think I've said enough. I do feel like I'm repeating myself at this point, so is there anything else I need to say? I mean, did I mention that Asians do better in America than white people? I forget what percentage of the population Asians are, but if I were that interested, I would go back and look at COVID results and compare blacks to whites to Asians. Because my guess is whites died more often from COVID than Asians did. What would I base that prediction on? In America, Asians have higher credit scores than whites. Asians have higher education levels than whites. Asians have a higher median income than whites. Asians have lower incarceration than whites. Now I could say, well, that's because America's racist, and America obviously shows favoritism towards Asians, right? And therefore, Asians would die less often than whites from COVID. But I could say that, but really it makes more sense to say that Asians have lower rates of heart disease and diabetes than whites. And so if I were going to look at these death rates among Asians versus whites, I would predict that Asians have lower death rates from COVID than white people do, right? Of course, I don't even know that they have lower rates of heart disease and diabetes, right? That's just another prediction based on all those things that I just said, right? That Asians have a higher education level, they have higher income, they have higher credit scores. My guess is if you have a high credit score, you probably don't you're probably across the board, if the higher your credit score, the lower your rates of diabetes and heart disease. Is that a good prediction? I have no idea. It is just a generalization. It's just an assumption I'm making. So I think I'll end there.